Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating idea, Dr. Dennis Price's philosophy called the asymmetry of power. It's all about what's really going on under the hood of our political debates. It gives us a whole new way to think about governance, power, and, what keeps a society stable.
All right, so where do we even start with this? Well, Dr. Price kicks things off by challenging something we all kind of take for granted, this idea that politics is just a big battle between left and right. He says, nope, that's not it at all. It's actually something completely different.
So instead of seeing politics as this classic good versus evil fight, he wants us to see it as a struggle between two different ways a society can totally fall apart. I mean, think about it. If you have too much change all the time without any stability, that's chaos. But if you have too much stability with no change at all, that's stagnation. Neither one is evil, right? But if one side completely takes over for too long, the whole thing can just collapse.
And this gets to a really core part of his thinking. He says a society isn't some machine that you can just engineer to be perfect. No, it's more like a living thing. It needs balance. So the goal isn't for one side to win forever. A healthy society is supposed to kind of breathe, It goes through cycles of change and then periods where things settle down and consolidate. It's always correcting itself.
Okay, but here's the big twist. This is where the whole thing gets really interesting. Dr. Price argues that this natural, healthy cycle, it's broken. And why is it broken? Well, he says it all comes down to power. It's just not spread out evenly.
And that leads us to the big question at the very heart of his philosophy. Is all power the same? Dr. Price says absolutely not. He draws this really clear line between the kind of power you win at the ballot box and the kind of power that's just baked into a society's core institutions.
And this, right here, is what he calls the asymmetry of power. Think about it. Electoral power is temporary, right? It's here today, gone tomorrow, depending on who wins the next election. But institutional power, that's the real deal. It's way more durable. We're talking about the power that lives inside universities, the media, all these cultural institutions. That's the stuff that shapes how we think and what we believe over the long haul.
So where do we find this institutional power? Well, according to Dr. Price, it's concentrated in a few key places. Think universities, the media, the legal world, and what he calls the permanent bureaucratic class. The government agencies that are there no matter who's president. These are the places that really define our shared reality. They set the norms, they shape the language, and their influence goes way beyond any single election cycle.
And he has this fantastic metaphor to explain it all. Imagine a pendulum swinging back and forth. Those are the elections, right? Swinging left, swinging right. But, and this is the key part, the whole floor that the pendulum is swinging over is tilted. So even as it swings, the overall drift is always in one direction because the institutional ground itself isn't level.
Okay, so if this power imbalance is real, how does it actually show up in our politics? Dr. Price points to a very specific pattern that he calls the politics of crisis. This is the idea that issues get framed as these permanent, ongoing moral emergencies that require constant management and, control.
And he says it follows this four-step playbook. Step 1, you take a really complex, maybe even unavoidable part of life. Step 2, you reframe it not as a problem to be managed, but as a deep, systemic moral failure. Step 3, you declare that it's basically impossible to ever truly solve. And then step 4, you use that permanence, the fact that it's unsolvable, to justify endless oversight and control.
And here's the really crucial takeaway from that. According to him, this completely changes what government is even for. It stops being about solving actual concrete problems, and it turns into this machine for indefinitely managing social norms and basically being the moral supervisor for all of society.
And that leads us right into the next major idea in this whole philosophy. It's a huge critique of this belief that you can perfectly manage a super complex society from the top down, like some kind of master planner.
Let's go back to that idea of society as a living thing. It needs to grow, but it also needs to heal and repair itself. Dr. Price says you absolutely need that progressive drive for innovation and change. That's the growth. But you equally need that conservative instinct for stability, for consolidating what works. A healthy system has to have both, working in balance.
So, because big, top-down plans can so often backfire and have all these unintended consequences, Dr. Price argues that we should treat them as being inherently risky. The burden of proof, he says, shouldn't be on the people defending things as they are. It should be on the people who want to interfere to prove, beyond a doubt, that their big idea won't actually make things worse.
And this gets us to one of his major critiques, especially of the modern welfare state. The argument here is that the state, even with the best intentions, has slowly but surely pushed out other institutions that used to do these jobs. Things like taking care of family, community support, charity, things that were once handled by families, neighborhoods, and religious groups, have been systematically replaced by government programs and bureaucracy.
So what's the endgame here? Where does all this thinking lead? Well, it all builds up to what Dr. Price calls a philosophy of limits. It's a vision for how to govern that's really grounded in realism and, maybe most importantly, restraint.
Now, this philosophy is all about a limited state, but it's really important to say this is not a call for anarchy, not at all. The argument is that government has a few absolutely essential, non-negotiable jobs to do, things like national defense, upholding the rule of law. But for anything beyond that core mission, the bar should be incredibly high. Any new intervention has to prove it's totally necessary and won't just create a whole new set of problems.
And ultimately, the author connects this whole framework to the grand sweep of history, the rise and fall of civilizations. The argument is pretty stark. Real, long-term stability doesn't come from trying to design a perfect utopia. It comes from building tough, resilient systems that actually account for human weakness and encourage things like responsibility instead of fragility. And this quote, man, it just perfectly sums up the entire philosophy. The big idea is that trying to do too much, even with the best intentions, that constant impulse to fix everything from the top, is actually a much bigger threat to a society's health than just being a little more cautious and maybe not intervening at all.
And so, at the end of the day, Dr. Price's work leaves us with this huge, challenging question about what government is even for. What's the real goal? Is it to perfect society and build some kind of utopia? Or is it something much more modest? Is the real goal just to keep the whole thing from falling apart, to prevent catastrophe and maintain stability? It's a lot to think about.